After America is made on the lands of the Kire-Wurrung, Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung and Bunurong peoples, we pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded.
We are in a battle for the soul of America.
This is a fraud on the American public.
Hi, I'm Angus Blackman, and this is After America. Pete Hegseth talks a lot about making the US military more lethal and less bound by rules of engagement.
We're training warriors, not defenders. We fight wars to win, not to defend. We also don't fight with stupid rules of engagement. We untie the hands of our warfighters to intimidate, demoralize, hunt, and kill the enemies of our country.
Historically, United States foreign policy has hardly been all peace and love, to say the least. But this administration is focusing its military strength in new and concerning ways. Its highly irregular use of the military to strike alleged drug boats in Latin America, for example. Its deployment of the National Guard to Democrat-run cities, and the president's suggestion to Hegseth that he use these troublesome US cities as training grounds for the military. To discuss the American military under Trump and Hegseth, I was joined by Allan Behm, Australia Institute Advisor in International and Security Affairs. We talked about the so-called double tap strike on an alleged drug boat, the fallout from the Signalgate scandal, and Trump's big night on the internet. But before we go to the conversation, just a reminder that the latest book from Australia Institute Press, A Time for Bravery, What Happens When Australia Chooses Courage, is available now. It features stories of Australian bravery from Yanis Varoufakis, Senator Fatima Payman, John Hewson AM, Craig Foster, Amy Ramakis, Barry Cassidy, and more. Usually available for just $35.99. Use the code POD5 at checkout, that's POD5, to save $5. The offer is available for a limited time only. Order before Thursday, the 11th of September to get it in time for Christmas at australiainstitute.org.au/store or via the link in the show notes. Here's Allan. Allan, Emma's on holidays this week, so the boys are in charge. How good?
Well, no, we're not in charge. We're never in charge, Angus. She's hovering over us, just making sure that the brain waves are focused, you know.
Well, speaking of brainwaves, or maybe lack of them, the Trump administration, there's been a lot of news swirling around the Department of Defense. So the US government has been striking what it says are drug smuggling boats in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific. And it seems particularly focused on Venezuela. Can you tell me why? Why Venezuela? Why now?
Well, Venezuela, like a couple of the other countries of South America, is a tribute to really poor diplomacy by the United States over a very long period of time. And one of the reasons for that poor diplomacy is that the State Department, generally speaking, doesn't hold sway in the conduct of serious and real diplomacy in the United States. Sway is held essentially by a franchise operation, which is known not so affectionately as the CIA. So the Central Intelligence Agency actually does the heavy shovel and spade work in the conduct of American foreign policy. Since the Second World War, and the CIA itself grew out of the Special Operations Executive. And so the whole mindset of the CIA is warlike operations.
Yeah.
Whether it's Colombia or Nicaragua, Cuba or Venezuela, you've got the same general mindset there that you achieve your national security policy outcomes through the use of force and through the use of, shall we say, clandestine intelligence means. So that's a habit which the United States has got into in Central and South America. Chile, of course, is another famous example where Australia was involved back in the 70s. So America's got form there.
Yeah, and I'm interested in why now specifically, because, I mean, as I understand it, Venezuela hasn't changed that much, right?
Well, Trump doesn't like Maduro.
No.
In the same way as previous presidents didn't like Chavez. And, a president like Trump will take his dislikes out in pretty active form. So I think Maduro has a fair bit to do with it. But more than that, Venezuela is sitting on the world's greatest oil reserves. And so you've got to see it also in terms of America's long-term wish to dominate Venezuela's oil exports to its own advantage in the same sort of way that the Brits tried to dominate Iran's oil exports back in the days in the 1950s.
Yeah. And so one of the reasons we're talking about this is on the 2nd of September, the US military undertook a strike against an alleged drug boat in the Caribbean. It bombed the boat once and then it bombed it again, killing 2 survivors from the initial attack. And this is sometimes known as a double tap strike.
The White House is drawing a distinction here, saying the final order for the follow-up strike did not come from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth.
It's very, very clear in this video, which, by the way, should be made public. You had 2 shipwrecked people on the top of the tiny little bit of the boat that was left, that was capsized. The bow. They weren't signaling to anybody.
Did you see any evidence of them trying to use a radio?
No, John, but they were clearly not incapacitated. They were not distressed. One guy took his T-shirt off like he was sunbathing. They were trying to get the boat back up and to continue their mission of spreading these drugs all across America.
Even if you accept all of the questionable legal premises around this mission, around these strikes, it's still very hard to imagine how these 2 were returning to any sort of fight in that condition.
President Trump said he would have no problem if the full video of the strike is released. When can we see that video? When will you release it?
We're reviewing it right now to make sure sources, methods, it's an ongoing operation, TTPs. We've got operators out there doing this right now, so whatever we were to decide to release, we'd have to be very responsible about. So we're reviewing that right now.
In general, Allan, is a military allowed to blow up boats, whether they're carrying drugs or otherwise?
Well, in a state of declared war, of course, they blow up boats all the time.
Yeah.
But in this particular case, military operations against suspect drug smugglers is pretty unusual. And one of the reasons it's unusual, Angus, is that normally you would use law enforcement methods here rather than using the military power of a country. And so to conduct airstrikes against a speedboat is not only unusual, but in the minds of most international law experts, and particularly those who know about the laws of armed conflict, it's also illegal. And so it is highly unusual to go down that avenue to control alleged drug smugglers. Now, there's not a lot of evidence that Venezuela is any kind of kingpin in the export of drugs into the United States. But, the United States is making these claims. I've not seen any evidence for it, nor, I think, have any Americans seen evidence for it. But it's complicated, I think, Angus, by the fact that the president, as commander-in-chief, is using the military under his own authority. And so for the military, they're between a rock and a hard place. Admiral Bradley, I think his name is, would certainly know that those strikes were outside the normal parameters of armed conflict, and he would probably suspect that they were illegal.
Yeah.
But he is subject to the authority of the commander-in-chief. So he's in the same sort of position that the Wehrmacht was in when they were told to go and invade Poland. It's an unenviable position for the military leaders to be in. The only options they've got essentially is resignation if they don't agree with it. Yeah. And, of course, we've seen none of that to date.
But no hope or dream we have for America can succeed unless we stop the illegal immigrant invasion, the worst that's ever been seen anywhere in the world. There's never been an invasion like this anywhere.
Well, the Constitution is clear, and that, of course, is the supreme law of the land, that the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended in a time of invasion.
It's the enemy from within, all the scum that we have to deal with that hate our country. That's a bigger enemy than China and Russia.
And Governor Pritzker is providing aid and comfort to the riotous mob that is physically assaulting, obstructing, impeding, and attacking ICE officers. And his latest act, declaring that there are no-go zones where federal law enforcement is not permitted, is truly an act of insurrection against the federal government.
We've seen tactics like this. I'm not talking about the strike itself, but using the kind of language of invasion and declarations of war with immigration, right? Are there some parallels here in terms of the way that the administration is trying to justify its actions?
I don't think there are parallels in substance, but there is this, as I touched on earlier, there's this general mindset, a mindset that you conduct your international affairs as though you were in a state of constant armed conflict. And so whether it's repatriating so-called illegal immigrants or whether it's chasing after drug runners, you have the same narrow set of tools at your disposal. Now, they're pretty powerful tools.
Yeah.
And as one often says, if all you've got is a sledgehammer, then everything looks as though it's just a peanut and you smash it.
Yeah. And Allan, what are the responsibilities of states when it comes to survivors of an attack? We've seen talk of this double strike attack, and 2 survivors of the initial strike in this September 2 incident were killed. Generally speaking, what are states supposed to do when there are survivors in a situation like that?
Well, if the laws of armed conflict were applying in this case, all combatants have a responsibility towards the welfare of anybody who's been wounded and anybody who's been injured. It is against the laws of war and therefore a criminal act to go after somebody who's been injured or who is otherwise hors de combat and to kill them. We've had a taste of that in Australia, as you know, with allegations of very serious criminality on the part of our own special forces, and one person in particular, as indeed there have been some allegations against American servicemen back in Iraq on exactly the same counts.
Yeah.
So in these situations, the problem is in initiating a warlike act at the very beginning, being compounded by illegal activities to follow it. So you have compounding illegalities. That certainly would be my position. And I do have a fair bit of experience in this because it was part of my job when I was running this area in the Department of Defense.
Yeah. And so US Defense Department officials and Republicans briefed on the second strike argued it was legal on the basis that the 2 survivors who were killed by it were trying to sort of stay in the fight. They were trying to, I guess, salvage the drugs or something along those lines. But a Democrat who was also briefed by defense called it, quote, one of the most troubling things I've seen. In a normal government, surely a thorough investigation is warranted at the very least when you've got this sort of doubt cast over actions like this.
Of course. And I suspect that there will be a fairly thorough investigation of this because it is so muddy.
Yeah.
But in the case of the 2 people, they were in the water. I mean, it's not as though they were sort of pushing on, driving their speedboat, gathering any bundles of drugs that have been chucked out in the water. They were actually, I think, struggling for their lives.
We fight to win. We unleash overwhelming and punishing violence on the enemy. We also don't fight with stupid rules of engagement. We untie the hands of our warfighters to intimidate, demoralize, hunt, and kill the enemies of our country. No more politically correct and overbearing rules of engagement. Just common sense, maximum lethality, and authority for warfighters.
And then I told Pete, we should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military, National Guard, but military.
No more climate change worship. No more division, distraction, or gender delusions. No more debris. As I've said before, and will say again, we are done with that shit.
So you've been on the show previously talking about Pete Hegseth's speech to the military at Quantico a little while back, where he talked about a warrior ethos and a renewed focus on lethality. Since then, we've seen decorated servicemen and women resign, some removed from their positions. Trump has floated using Democrat-run cities as training grounds for the military and I guess has deployed the National Guard to Democrat-run cities already. I mean, the future of the US military, it sounds pretty bleak, Allan. This doesn't seem like it's heading in a great direction.
Well, I've got to add a couple of distinctions here. First of all, the way in which the civil control of the military works in the United States is essentially that the president and the Secretary of Defence, now called the Secretary of War, harking back to our earlier words about the sort of the warlike framing of so much American policy, that passes for civil control of the military. But in fact, in the United States, it's putting the military in a very difficult position because the civil control of the military should be accountable constitutionally to the Congress. And it is the Congress who votes the money. But that's changed a fair bit over the last half century, really, where presidents have been calling the shots and weak Congresses have been going along with the diktat of the president. And that's been the case in the United States under Trump. He controls both houses, and the Republicans certainly have not been party to any controls over the exercise of effectively war powers by the president and by the Secretary of War, as he calls himself.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of turmoil in the military. I think we all know that. There's a lot of former and retired military officers who are making their views very, very plain. And you can bet that if they're making their views as plain and outspoken as they are, so many of their former subordinates who are now commanders in the American military will be harbouring exactly the same sentiments.
Yeah. I want to move from this, I guess, kind of terrible situation with the strikes in the Caribbean to another issue that's plagued the Defense Department in the United States. There's been a report into the signal scandal released. So Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth appeared to share details of a forthcoming military strike in Yemen earlier in the year on the Signal messaging app with senior officials. And unfortunately for him, a journalist from The Atlantic who'd been added by mistake.
Nobody was texting war plans, and that's all I have to say about that.
The Inspector General of the Pentagon has concluded, looking into the Signal Gate controversy from earlier this year, that the Secretary of Defense indeed put the lives of troops at risk.
But the report says that he has the authority to declassify information, and the Pentagon says it's a total exoneration of Hegseth.
They say that he was, in fact, violating DoD policy because he was using his personal phone to discuss information that had been marked secret, although not necessarily classified. Now, one of the big questions is whether Pete Hegseth declassified some of this information on his own before it was shared in this messaging application.
If it had been a week later, it wouldn't have mattered.
Sure.
But the timing of it was so close to the actual event that he was putting at risk the lives of American servicemen, essentially.
Yeah.
And that, of course, is a total no-no. At the very least, it is totally irresponsible. And if it were to be you or I who transmitted that, it would also be a felony in the United States.
Yeah.
We would have committed a crime. Now, in the Trump administration, that probably doesn't matter so much because Trump will, I think, almost certainly back Hegseth and will say, well, he was new and he was only doing his job.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is he should have known better because he should have had highly skilled and highly experienced advisors around him who would have kept him narrowly within the military's communication systems. So in my own opinion, this is irresponsible. I think that it is culpable. It is for him either to resign or for the president to sack him, and I suspect neither of those things will happen.
No, that doesn't seem super likely. And I mean, listening to expertise isn't a noted strength of this administration.
No.
You've worked in the Australian Department of Defence, Allan. How concerned should the Australian government be about our primary security ally being loose, as an absolute understatement, this loose with information?
Look, we should be concerned about it. I mean, I would expect a lot of lessons have been learnt, not least of all by Hegseth, to the extent that he's capable of learning lessons. But a lot of lessons would have been learnt out of this, and I think that his Signal account has probably been deleted at this point.
You'd hope so.
You would hope so. I think for Australia, we have a much tighter system.
Yeah.
We have much clearer rules, and we have much more effective systems for proper accountability in the conduct of operations. Sometimes things, don't work. That's what we found in Afghanistan on the matters we were touching upon just a bit earlier.
Yeah.
But for the most part, our communication systems involving Australian Defence Force personnel are very tight, and the protocols are observed absolutely. In this particular matter, I think the question arises, what about Australians who are actually serving under US command rather than serving under Australian command?
Absolutely.
What happens with them? And that's a somewhat more complicated issue, because when we appoint Australian officers to work directly with the Americans under American command, these are very serious and deep secondments into the US system. They operate within the US rules. Now, those rules are generally pretty tight too, but if they are involved in the commission of some kind of error or other, then that would be American accountability, not Australian accountability. And that's where it would end. They would not end up in front of an Australian court, though they could possibly, in some circumstances, end up in front of an American tribunal or an American court.
Yeah. But I mean, our enmeshment, I guess, with US defence and the US military is, as we're constantly told, based on shared values of democracy and the rule of law. Like, if there's a disregard for the rule of law in the United States, I would think that the Defence Department might be concerned about putting Australian servicemen and women in a compromised position, right? Do you think that's an active concern for Australian officials?
Yes, it is. When an Australian officer is seconded to a US unit, they are pretty fully briefed before they are seconded. They're told very clearly what Australia's expectations of them are, and where they are operating with Australian forces in joint or combined operations. Joint operations means that command is retained by each of the national unit. Combined operation means that there's a single commander. So there is a bit of an art form in that. But when they're in either joint or combined operations, they always have the availability of referring to their own national commanders. So if they entertain a doubt, they can seek guidance from the headquarters of joint operations in Australia, and they will get that appropriate advice.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. All right, well, I want to move to domestic politics now. One night last week, Trump spent an evening posting 160 times on his social media platform, Truth Social. The posts included conspiracy theories, attacks on his political opponents, self-congratulatory messages, and I quote, "Truth Social is the best. There is nothing even close," 3 exclamation marks. But he posted that message twice. Are the wheels coming off this bloke? What's going on, Allan?
Well, as ever, it's sort of hard to read. I don't think the wheels are coming off myself. There has been a noticeable dip in the polls, and there's a bit of self-congratulation going on in the Democratic wing at the moment, though I do think it's a bit premature. Trump is a brilliant user of short-form media. I mean,
he's probably the best, right? He's probably the best.
I would say he is the best. He has this remarkable capacity to use Truth Social to hammer home the acceptability of untruth, and to get people to accept what he says as being the case. And he's absolutely brilliant at it. I mean, propaganda and disinformation, they're things that Trump could be teaching in any propaganda school. I mean, Lenin was good at it, and Goebbels was really good at it, and Trump, I think, would give them lessons in how to do it.
Certainly in terms of volume, he's pretty impressive.
And content, because he knows how to use short-form expressions. I mean, he's a sloganist. And his slogans are actually pretty good. I mean, just look at the awful nicknames he gives to people. I mean, they're malicious, they're vicious, but they're terribly effective.
I can't refer to Jeb Bush without calling him low energy Jeb. It's stuck in my head.
Or Sleepy Joe.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it really is vicious and it's poisonous. So Trump has got this great capacity to regroup and to feed rancid raw meat to his base. And his base like it because they're angry, they're disillusioned, and they're often dissociated from the mainstream of American life. And they like that sort of thing, and Trump is very good at providing it to them.
Yeah.
So it'll depend, I think, Angus, on the extent to which Trump continues to hammer Truth Social, which I think he will.
Yeah, yeah.
The invective that he's able to pour on everybody, and his inevitable success, I think, in effective political labelling and sloganeering.
Yeah. Certainly the invective is unlikely to stop. But as you mentioned, he is really unpopular. So you referred to polls there. CNN's poll of polls puts him at puts his approval rating, at 39%, which isn't great in a normal political cycle. But I mean, this is something we talk about on the show a bit. Do you think the midterms will be a normal election where an unpopular incumbent, gets punished for not doing what people want, or is something else at play here?
We've discussed previously some concerns that a lot of people have got about the conduct of the midterms. Angus, you referred earlier to the remarks that Trump had made about using American cities as practice grounds for military operations.
Yeah.
We've had the deployment of the National Guard to Washington and the sad death of 2 National Guardsmen, which really was tragic.
Yeah.
We've had the same things offered to New York and Chicago and even Los Angeles. The worry that I have, and I'm not alone on this, that should the polls continue to look really bad, it's not beyond consideration that Trump could deploy the National Guard and cause the midterms not to happen, particularly in the Democrat states. And were that interference into America's political processes to occur, I have no ability to predict at the moment what would happen.
No.
There would be a lot of pushback, of course, from voters in Democrat states if that were to happen. But more importantly, what would happen within the system itself, I really don't know. Would there be a strong reaction in the red states as well as in the blue states? I can't tell at the moment. Would depend very much on the packaging that Trump was putting together and the way in which he was able to call the nature of the threat to America's security, its way of life, its stability, and all of that. So I am worried about that, and I think we should watch it very, very carefully. It is time, I think, for the Democrats to be a little bit more, not a little bit, a lot more defined in the way in which they're conducting their own politics.
Yeah.
I think they need to have a lot more unity within their party. They've got to settle down and now start identifying where their future leadership is going to be, how they're going to get credible competitors for whoever the Republicans put up. I don't think it'll be Trump, but whoever they put up, it could be J.D. Vance, and he has the benefit of the incumbency of the vice presidency. So they're going to have to work very much harder, and until we see some signs of real political engagement by the Democrats, I think it's a bit too early to call.
But Allan, couldn't you say that unity has in some ways been part of the problem? I mean, they've put up, I don't think this is, disrespectful or anything, but pretty middle of the road candidates politically. And I mean, persisted with Biden, even though there was there was so much evidence that, he wasn't up to it, like whatever you think of the guy's politics or whatever. Wouldn't it be good if the Democrats actually had a bit of a fight about it and had a, I guess, open debate, showed voters that they might be open to different ways of doing things than they have in the past, which just objectively hasn't worked?
Well, disunity is death. We all know that. We've experienced that in Australian politics. Incompetence is also death.
Right.
And political incompetence comes at very, very high cost. And we're seeing that in Australia also right at the moment. I mean, just today, the head of the Liberal Party in South Australia has resigned.
Yeah.
So, it's as I say, political incompetence is extremely dangerous. The inability of anybody to move Joe Biden early enough to give an alternative candidate a go. And frankly, Kamala Harris was a pretty reasonable sort of candidate.
Yeah.
There's no reason that she shouldn't have run, but there should have been a proper runoff.
Right.
There should have been primaries in which people could have a look at what the field might be.
Yeah.
And I think the Democrats have got to start moving right now to show the electorate that it's got some really credible people. I mean, they've got Gavin Newsom, obviously. They've got a few others as well. And it would appear that Kamala Harris is not totally uninterested in having another go.
Indeed.
So maybe we can identify 2 already, but they need to have half a dozen quite credible operators who can get out there and instill a bit of confidence in the voters that there is a real contest running. I think J.D. Vance is a pretty competent politician, by the way, and should he get the nomination, the Republican nomination, he would be a formidable candidate in my view, because he's got a bit of fire in his belly and he's hungry for it.
He's certainly hungry for it.
He's certainly hungry for it. And so the Democrats have got to find people who've got fire in the belly and who are hungry for it too.
Yeah. Well, Allan, that's all we've got time for. Thanks so much for joining me on After America this week.
Not at all, Angus.
Thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode. A reminder that you can save $5 off our latest book, A Time for Bravery, What Happens When Australia Chooses Courage, with the code POD5, that's POD5. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the show today. You can reach us via our email address, podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au. This episode was recorded on Friday the 5th of September, and After America is supported by the Andrew Farron Foundation. I'm Angus Blackman. Thanks for listening.